Well, I think Parliamentary Review does something very interesting. It provides a platform for people to share and express their views, and I hope we're going to be able to build on that even more so that people can interconnect with each other. But it also gives an opportunity for parliamentarians to know that people are taking interest in what they're doing and how they're doing it.
Hello and welcome to the Parliamentary Review podcast, the podcast that puts leadership at the centre of attention. I'm Jonathan White, and in each episode I'm joined by directors, CEOs, CFOs, government ministers, chairmen, presidents, maybe one day even the German Chancellor, that is if she ever does actually retire. The aim is to discover who these people are, the people who get up each morning and make Britain work. We learn about the latest figures from the Office of National Statistics to the ins and outs of post-Brexit haulage logistics, and of course the innovation and success in the country that make it all worthwhile in the end. We also get their take on the current political and economic state of the country. Later on in this episode, you'll have the chance to hear our exclusive interview with Lord Blunkett, former Home Secretary, former Education Secretary, and of course, the current co-chairman of the Parliamentary Review. But for now, we're joined by Lyndon Harfoot, the CEO and founder of the KIGG Global Group. Lyndon lived abroad for 26 years, working as a consultant and project engineer. 13 years ago, he brought the company to Britain, establishing a new office in Glamorgan. KIGG conducts over 95% of its business, not just outside of the United Kingdom, but outside the European Union. We'll explore what it takes for businesses to be a success in the international market and what it is that has made KIGG the success it is today. Lyndon, welcome.
How do you do?
Thank you very much for joining us today.
My pleasure.
It's been some months since KIGG has been in the review, KI Global Group. I think the listeners would very much like to know, be interested certainly, in what the company yourself have been up to since.
Well, the biggest thing is that the management contract that we had with the Iraq Ministry of Industry, that's been signed.
Fantastic. And I know that's something we'll talk about in a little bit more detail in a bit, I think.
Yeah. But it's not the end of it, because it still has to be ratified by the Ministry of Industry. But it means at least we've got no competition anymore.
Excellent. Well, I can only hope their bureaucracy isn't as perhaps slow as some other countries I can think of, but I wouldn't get my hopes too high.
It's a nightmare.
And I know that is fantastic news. I think when the article was written, it hadn't officially been signed, obviously, so that's fantastic. Now, Lyndon, you founded the company it was 2005.
That's right.
That's it. And you were the sole person working there. And the company KMSB in Malaysia was your only client.
Well, it wasn't quite the sole person working then. It started off in Switzerland, where I was the sole purpose. I worked for a large Swiss international company. Mm-hmm. And they closed my department down, and I started a one-man company operating from a bedroom office. And it went from consultancy and slowly grew. And from there, we actually went into project engineering, and the company moved from Switzerland to Hong Kong, where we ground KI Global. And there we had a larger organization, and as I said, we went to project engineering. Our problem came is when our clients came along and said, we wanted to change things. We needed R&D. And that was a problem which was very difficult because our background wasn't R&D. So the purpose of coming back to Britain was actually to establish an R&D department within the company. And that we did. We worked locally with South Wales University.
Yes.
And now we have our own R&D. So, Britain does have its assets.
Absolutely. And from that time to now, of course, you've expanded to work in so many other countries, with so many more staff, both full-time and not, around the world. How did you go about sort of shaping that success, growing that? Obviously, research and development had a lot to do with it.
Well, it did, but it went from trial and error. We went down a path, hit a brick wall, came back. Not to get into too much politics, we wasted a lot of time trying to enter the European market, and that was a failure. And we wasted a lot of time and resources. We then stopped, reassessed it, and we now concentrate purely on the international market outside Europe.
I think I'm right in saying that it's 95% of businesses, in fact, outside of the common market.
Yes. More than that, actually. Depends from year to year, but last year it was almost 100%.
Fantastic. And I think a little bit later as well we can talk about that in a bit more detail. It's certainly a bit of a pressing topic as things stand. And in fact, you've already mentioned it, but you have developed this long-term relationship with the University of South Wales. Now, a lot of businesses don't necessarily appreciate, I think, the innovation and benefits that can come from working from such a relationship. Would you mind talking us through that in a little bit more detail?
Well, really, it's a bit of a hit and miss affair. We tried doing a relationship with Swansea University, and actually it never worked. Some of these universities do research for a paper. Other universities do research for industry. And you've got to find one of those universities that's actually interested in cooperating with industry. And that's what we were able, fortunately, to do with what was then Glamorgan University.
Fantastic. And I assume the result of that has been quite groundbreaking research, and it gives you an ability to offer clients around the world really quite an all-encompassing product, as it were.
Yes, and today I was having conversations with patent engineers where we're going to now go through the process of submitting our first patent.
Fantastic. Good luck. That's fantastic news again. But perhaps stepping back a little bit from the business, looking more broadly at the sector. As things stand, there are certain political and economic events that one can't ignore at the moment. What would you say the main challenges are to your sector in the medium term as things stand?
None. We're absolutely divorced from Brexit. Whether Brexit can only bring good things to us in the long term, but no, Brexit won't affect us in one way. When we fail to enter the European market, by default, we're immune from it.
Absolutely. Well, out of interest, we do hear this from an awful lot of businesses like yours that do spend the vast majority of their time and effort not dealing with the European market, but indeed the rest of the world, where, of course, most of Britain's trade now lies. What were the challenges you found in cracking it? It's something a lot of British businesses seem to find difficult compared to, say, the French and the Germans.
No, that's not the problem. The problem is understanding your client, and the whole process is slightly a different thought process. And I spent 26 years living abroad. Now, when I first went abroad, I tried to introduce British methods into a local environment that just didn't work. And it was only when I learned to evaluate what's going on around me and try and adapt my approach that I was able to really start getting a rapport with people. And I think that's it. If you go in there and you can assume that the people you're dealing with are more knowledgeable in their market than you, and you might have some technical expertise that they require, but they know what they're doing, that's half the battle.
Absolutely. So really, they are very, very natural barriers that a lot of people perhaps just don't appreciate in the first place that exist.
Unless you've been exposed to other ideas, you don't even conceive that anyone else could think a different way. And that's what I learned the hard way.
Well, as long as it was learned, I suppose, that's the important thing. Yeah. Now, you have mentioned it, obviously, already, but with the news, of course, that the contract has been signed with the Iraqi Ministry of Industry, which is a fantastic contract. There must have been, though, some key challenges in acquiring that, especially, I think, a lot of British banks and businesses are hesitant to do business there in the first place.
Well, there were several challenges, and the first challenge was actually visiting the client back in 2016 in the height of the problems. It was the only time in my life I've actually been scared witless about going somewhere.
I'm sure you won't mind me saying it. You've served in the RAF.
Yes, that's right. And that didn't scare me, but this trip did. Because the client's factory is not far from Fallujah, and the whole area was an area that you shouldn't go to. Well, we went there.
Well, it seems it was all worthwhile in the end.
Yes, it was.
So, aside from the putting your life on the line for the contract, what were the more business-related challenges, perhaps?
The next one, actually, and this is a little bit of praise to UKTI. There is an organisation called UK Trade and Investment, I think it is. It's a very good government organisation. And I cannot praise the Baghdad office highly enough. They did wonders for us, organised a trip there where they went down with us and met the Deputy Minister of Industry and so on. They've done a really good job for us.
Fantastic. And I know they've not got the biggest team in Baghdad either, and it's perhaps something central government doesn't put high on their list, their particular office, so that's fantastic to hear.
There's another point which might praise you a little bit. When we were signing the contract, we went through a process, and it was signed in Malaysia, and the local ambassador was questioning who is KIGG. Well, one of the delegations from the ministry pulled out your parliamentary review of last year and gave it to him. End of story. No more arguments.
I think that's something Lord Pickles might know something about, but I'll have to leave that to him to answer. Well, it must be an absolute relief, though, to know that contract's been signed, and all that's a matter of time now is for it to be ratified. Given that's a three-year long process.
Well, yes, but this is the way our business goes. We never sign a contract within 6 months or so. We started I'm at the end of a contract negotiation with Saudi Arabia, but that started last year, actually. Our first contact with the client was last year.
Now, it's fantastic to be able to speak to someone that can look beyond Brexit, which seems to have caused quite a number of people to really become quite depressed and double down on negative points. But so if we can put that to a side, which is a nice thing to be able to do so, and hopefully before long the whole country can. And maybe it's a bit of an unfair question, but looking beyond that, if you were, for example, say, Secretary of State for the day, maybe just for a few hours after lunch, what would you do in that scenario? You had a magic wand to help out businesses like your own, or indeed to promote them overseas?
I would like to see the British government protecting British industry as much as other countries protect them. And it needs a reassessment of what we want for industry and how the government should encourage industry. But at the moment, we've been thrown to the wolves.
I think that really resonates, Lyndon. I think when former Prime Minister Theresa May, when she set up her original cabinet, I think there was some excitement when she reorganised the department to make the business department business and industrial strategy. And I think a lot of people have felt let down, and that there has not always been an identifiable strategy on that front. And you only have to look, I think, to a lot of countries in Europe, the United States, that do have and promote their key industries perhaps more than we do.
Well, I'm not in favour of protectionism overall.
But I'm not necessarily.
But I am in favour of a level playing field.
Yes.
And if you're dealing with an organisation or a country that protects itself, then we should do something similar. And it's simple as that.
Yes, absolutely. And hopefully, hopefully we do on the 31st of October leave the European Union, there can actually be some minds focused on that issue, because it's going to be an important one if we are out without an agreement, we are going to have to look at our tariffs. It will force people to look at our tariff programs and work out how they do compare with our direct trading partners. Now, perhaps speaking about politics more broadly, Lyndon, well, as you've said already, your company almost has a 100%, export rate, as it were. Now, you, I'm sure you won't mind me sharing it with the listeners, but you have changed your views over the years, to put it politely, regarding Europe, and I can't help but feel that would have something to do with, dealing with the market directly.
Yes, I lived in Germany and Switzerland for 15 years, and I considered myself European first. And if you'd have talked to me about Brexit then, I would have been horrified. But I since then established a business here, and having hit my head, the way of doing business there as a European company, doors were open to me. Yes. But the same doors are not open to me as a British company, and that's changed my whole attitude. And now I'm British first and Welsh second, and Europe doesn't even enter into it.
And I think that may well become a more and more common attitude as the years go by. What do you make? I know later in this podcast we hear from an interview from Co-Chairman Lord Blunkett, and he was mentioning that often in the past, especially since the war, if there has been a time of, I don't want to call it national crisis, but a time that has, caused a lot of minds to be frustrated somewhat, there often does come a point where leadership arrives and sort of saves the day, as it were.
Yes.
Business knows all about this, of course. It has to do this every single day. Is there something you look at the current political situation, Lyndon, and just think there's so much they could learn from business in this regard? Well,
if you talk about business and history, then let's talk about the oil crisis and the 3-day week that existed in the 70s.
Absolutely.
And I cannot possibly believe that having gone through that, Brexit will be worse than that. And that's my problem, that's my approach.
Well, I think, in fair, it's what a lot of it is a lack of perspective, perhaps, on things. And I think if you were to explain to a generation that won't remember 1973 and what happened, and that you said, well, you really did only have candle. You had to work and read by candlelight.
Yes,
some evening.
I was at home by candlelight. Absolutely.
Would they believe you anymore?
No.
And
would they believe 20% inflation?
Quite, and higher.
Yeah.
I mean, not to talk down the 1970s too much, but of course a decade that started with a 3-day week and ended with rubbish piling high in the streets and ambulances being turned away at hospitals.
Absolutely.
Now, yes, you're right, that's a national crisis.
And it was an undemocratic national crisis. No one had a vote.
Absolutely. And thankfully, after that decade of, as you said, high inflation and high taxes, and a terrible decade for business and unemployment, we got through it.
Yes.
And not only did we get through it, we fair to say, perhaps, prospered afterwards.
Agreed. Totally agree. We survived, and we'll survive Brexit.
Absolutely.
And the doom and gloom mongers, to me, need to think and read up a little tiny bit about the 1970s and what we went through then.
And in terms of that, and especially because this message, I think, needs to get through essentially to people that really they don't remember it because they weren't born. Fair enough. But if you could talk to young people, there's a lot of young entrepreneurs that listen to our programs, for example, what would you say to them, not only in terms of advice to give going forward, but indeed the perspective they ought and should have on history and business?
Well, first of all, every problem is a challenge, and a challenge can lead to a success. So what we're going through with Brexit is only going to be a challenge to overcome. And we're very versatile, and the British industry is very versatile. And And I think we will just, it's the shock of the unknown. But once we've gone through it, we will adapt.
Yes, I think it's a fantastic message and something that needs to be considered. I think for too many people, they've become perhaps so obsessed with the issue that for them, Brexit is the end of the conversation. When it happens, it just happens. But I think for the businessmen with foresight and politicians with foresight in this country, it is the beginning of something else.
In fact,
so go ahead.
I would like to say, I think the whole debate of Brexit is excellent. The whole controversy as Brexit is excellent because it's preparing us for a future challenge. And the future challenge is going to be artificial intelligence, automated vehicles, and it's going to absolutely transform how Britain looks in the next 10 or 20 years. The danger is that we will have a few techies working and a large proportion of the population unemployed. And the whole thing is of this Brexit, it's demonstrating that there's people got to vote. And if you don't look after the, should we say, the less able people, the more vulnerable people, then you get it back in the vote. And that, I would say, is an excellent lesson to politicians, and I think Brexit has done a good thing. It will wake people up, and maybe we will avoid the next disaster.
One can only hope, and I think, especially regarding artificial intelligence, it will be here sooner, I think, than a lot of people, or in fact, some of it's already here.
Agreed. And that's the big danger. That's going to make Brexit look like a storm in a teacup.
And perhaps that's another quite a strong issue. I know we're almost running out of time here, but I do want to bring up, given the number of countries you work in, it's becoming perhaps more important than ever to have not only a qualified workforce, but a versatile one.
Yes.
And that's something I think with Brexit being over soon, hopefully, will have, again, focus the minds of the policymakers and how important that is. How have you found the British workforce, generally speaking, on that front in terms of qualifications and versatility compared to the other countries, especially emerging economies in the Far East that you've worked with?
Well, this is one of the unique advantages that we have here. We exist purely because of the versatility of our staff. And if I make a comparison between Hong Kong and Britain as a business, Britain is far more business friendly than Hong Kong. So it's not just the staff, it's the flexibility within the business environment and the infrastructure. If you don't have a university nearby to get the extra knowledge that you need and you don't take advantage of it, you can't progress. But the biggest asset, the only real reason for staying in Britain is the skills and the flexibility of our staff. Otherwise, I'm better off in Singapore.
Absolutely. I think more people do need to say that because more people will realise that. Lyndon, it's been a pleasure talking. Before I let you go, I would like to ask: has there been, given the success you've had over the years, and maybe it's another unfair question, but I don't want to put you on the spot, but has there been a guiding principle in your life, and especially in your career, that has got you to where you are today?
Yes, we're a sort of a friendly organisation. We always try for a win-win solution so that both parties walk away satisfied. And that's our philosophy. There is a philosophy in business that I'm going to take advantage of you, and we don't do that. It's always a partnership with our clients out there. And if anything that has kept us going in these other foreign countries, it's trust. We're trusted. That's why they come back to us. And we're trusted because we don't let people down. We keep our word. And therefore, people come back to us.
Fantastic. Lyndon, thank you very much for joining us.
No, my pleasure.
Goodbye.
Bye-bye.
I hope you all enjoyed our chat with Lyndon, and especially learning more about the challenges facing the sector and how the whole team at the KIGG Group are continuing to raise standards. A company that really is doing its bit for UK PLC abroad, and indeed going to Fallujah to prove it. I think I'll sit with Westminster for now. Then again. But if you haven't heard it before, coming up now is our conversation with the Parliamentary Review's co-chairman, David Blunkett. Lord Blunkett served as Home and Education Secretary in Tony Blair's cabinet before receiving a peerage in 2015. Outside of politics, he's the Vice President of the Royal National Institute for Blind People and the National Alzheimer's Society. And when he has the time, he can be found cheering on his team, Sheffield Wednesday. I hope you enjoy listening as much as I enjoyed speaking to David. Here it is now.
We're now joined by Lord Blunkett. Thank you very much for joining us.
You're very welcome.
Now, it would probably be remiss of me if I didn't start, given the recent events in Parliament. I didn't ask you, given your 32 years in that place, about your thoughts regarding the unprecedented situation I think the public are looking at the minute.
Well, I think I see it very much like Joe Public. I see it as though I'm looking at something that is made up, that is scripted, that is like almost a sci-fi film where anything can happen and then anything does happen. And I'm very sad about that because I think that it's damaged our parliamentary democracy. I think that it's brought politics into disrepute, and I think it's created anger on all sides, whether people were strongly in favour of remaining or whether they were, as we call them, Brexiteers.
Absolutely. And given that situation, whether it's going to be a general election, many people are beginning to worry about how apathy taking effect.
Well, I'm worried about two things. Apathy in the respect of turnout and whether people vote, and anger and, if you like, the friction developed into a failure to be able to have a democratic dialogue, so that the respect that we have for each other, that the way in which we debate issues is often now broken down, and there's abuse in the street, not just of people because they're considered to be different or foreign, but because people recognise they have a different point of view. Now, that is new. I've been around in formal politics now for, goodness, almost all my adult life, because I was elected to a local authority in my city of Sheffield when I was 22. And I've never seen that. I've seen people get very annoyed, and that's fine, and people should get angry, but I've never experienced them display it in such personal venom before. And we need to calm that, because our democracy depends on people being able to have genuine disagreements and differences and to work them through the political process. Otherwise, we fall, as history teaches us, into the hands of extremists.
Absolutely. And given that you've just said what you just said, a lot of people are talking now about whether the party structure, which does exist at the minute, it can survive. We've seen both the Labour Party and the Conservative Party showing signs of buckling.
I think the political system the party system will survive. It may have a very rocky time in the near future, but I think it'll right itself. But it will only do that if political parties themselves sort out what's going on internally. I think both major parties have been, to use an old phrase, infiltrated. Came across a prominent minister just outside the cabinet whose current chair of their Conservative Association was the UKIP candidate against him back in 2015. We know about the challenges within the Labour Party and the way in which people who were thrown out of the party have either been able to or are seeking to rejoin. And so we've got this two-ender, if you like, the bread in the two sides of the sandwich coming together, and the middle is being squeezed. Now, there's academic work to say that actually the electorate aren't all that keen on centre parties, particularly at the moment. And I think we need to be wary of believing that the creation of some sort of centrist party in Britain would solve the problem. It would temporarily, but it wouldn't resolve the differences that people have and how we work them through.
A lot of people have been suggesting recently that the only way out of this situation is with a second referendum. And I write in saying that you have quite reluctantly come to that position yourself.
It took me a very long time to come to the conclusion that we would need an affirmative vote. I resisted it because I come from and represented an area deeply disaffected, feeling the effects of deindustrialization and then the austerity measures on the back of the global meltdown, and felt in my bones, which is why I wasn't one of those who thought we were easily going to win the referendum for Remain in 2016, that you need to deal with the underlying problems and causes of that disaffection. And the simple slogan, "They didn't hear you the first time, tell them again," could be very effective, a kind of Trumpian slogan that could be adopted by those who are very, very vehement Brexiteers. However, I think given the state that we're in, I came to the conclusion a few weeks ago, and I wrote in the Daily Telegraph, that I think the only way to deal with this is to get an agreement for this interim period, because that's what it is, a transition from where we are to where we might be, and then put that to the British people. And if the British people don't like that negotiated agreement, either Theresa May's original or something that emerges from the discussions and the debate and the toing and froing between the two major parties, put that to the electorate and give them a chance 3 years on from 2016 to make a new choice as to whether that's what they want to go for, that's the direction they want to take, or whether they'd like to take a step back and remain in the European Union.
And do you think that the people of Sheffield that did vote leave, many of whom voting for the first time in decades or the first time ever, do you think that they would feel maybe slightly frustrated at the call for a second vote?
Yes, I think they would. And I think we just have to be really honest about that. There would be a great deal of frustration, bordering on anger, people saying, we gave you the message, why didn't you just do it? And we have to be straight with them. The reason it's been complex, the reason it's taken this time, the reason that we are in the undoubted mess we're in, is because it wasn't simple. You didn't, as some people thought, sign a bit of paper and walk away. This is a complex, interconnected, economically, socially, in terms of our trade and our relationships, not just within the European Union, but with the European Union's agreements across the world. This is a complex issue. And to pretend otherwise is not to give people what they want, it's to patronize them and say, yes, we don't think you were wrong. We don't think that you got it wrong when you thought it was a simple way out. I think you just have to be straight with them, and they'll be angry. I mean, people are angry with me when I walk around in my own constituency and say, what are you up to? And I say, I'm up to trying to speak the truth. I'm up to trying to say it as it is, as I always have done.
Absolutely. Now, given all of that, one would expect the governing party to perhaps be somewhere between 20 points and to 30 points behind the opinion polls, but they are not. There has been an awful lot of criticism of the leadership of the opposition regarding that. Would you have any advice for the leadership of your party?
Well, I think belatedly, from the beginning of April, the two parties realised that they were going to sink separately if they didn't actually try and make an effort and at least display some endeavour to work together. I think had there been two different leaders post-2016 referendum, this would have happened a great deal earlier. It hasn't, but it can now. And it is remarkable that in the circumstances that the government have found themselves, not just in not being able to get the kind of deal that some people wanted, not even being able to hold all their party together, but actually being totally riven publicly with cabinet responsibility having broken down, to find themselves only marginally behind, or even on opinion polls through March, marginally in front of the Labour Party, is astonishing. And once this period is over, I think Labour will need to take a very long, hard look at why the British people have not turned, as they often do, to what is called Her Majesty's opposition. There are very complex reasons for that, including the fact that the leadership of the party have only realised, I think, very, very recently, that you have to reach out to people whose views you don't agree with, and you have to win them over to something more than the issues and the policies and the ideology you thought of in the first place.
And on that point, you'll be aware, certainly, that the Parliamentary Review itself has been dedicated to showcasing leadership in all its forms across the country. Now, speaking to many of our contributors, they have made clear that they do feel that leadership has been lacking, both from the government and opposition, as you've said. In your many years in politics, is there a time in certainly recent history where there has been perhaps a leadership vacuum like we're seeing today?
I think we find in Britain an interesting paradox. People want strong leaders, but they want leaders that listen and are responsive. And the two don't always go together. I've lived through the period of both Margaret Thatcher and Tony Blair, two leaders who knew what they wanted to do and were prepared to put it on the line. I've lived through Ted Heath and John Major, who were less clear. Ted Heath on Europe, yes, but not on much else. John Major really trying to mop up after the controversial and divisive Thatcher era, where they showed a different style of leadership. Now, they were portrayed as being weak. I don't think that's always the case. I think that you can have leaders who are very clear what they want to do, but to turn on its head the Marxist slogan, speak softly and walk with a big stick, they can actually do the job clearly and decisively. Clem Attlee was such a person, and in many ways so is Harold Macmillan. And those are the kind of leaders where you don't get bombast, you don't get, I know best and I'm going to push this through, but you actually get someone who can genuinely create a coalition of the willing, but has a clear idea about their values. And I hope we'll return to that.
Absolutely. And I think one of the strengths of the review has always been its sense of bipartisanship.
Well, I think Parliamentary Review does something very interesting. It provides a platform for people to share and express their views, and I hope we're going to be able to build on that even more so that people can interconnect with each other. But it also gives an opportunity for parliamentarians to know that people are taking interest in what they're doing and how they're doing it, and therefore to get the message that they've got to reflect outwards. We need both. We need the input into the system. We need voices. We need ideas. We need experiences through Parliamentary Review inwards, but we also need to ensure that the way in which our politics works is reflected outwards, so that people firstly understand how the system works, secondly the complexity and difficulty of it, and thirdly the way in which they need to tell us, I mean I'm in the upper house now, but to tell us as parliamentarians what they think and where we're going wrong, and for us to listen.
Absolutely. And on that point, you've been in public service for most of your life, Lord Blunkett, ever since Sheffield City Council. I mean, in that time, what are the key lessons you think you've learned in the best way for policymakers and those at the coalface to communicate and work together?
I've learned that actually there is enormous wisdom out there, and if you're prepared to engage and to listen, then your views might actually change. Mine have on a number of issues, particularly social issues, what small L liberal issues over the years, going in the opposite direction, it has to be said, to most people as they age. And you need to ensure that you've reached out to sufficient people to create that coalition that allows you to make progress, and that you won't create everything you want and change everything you want for the better overnight. It will never happen. There's no days where everything's done and we can all wash our hands of it and that's fine. We build building blocks. We stand, if you like, historically on the shoulders of those who came before us. And if we get that message, we won't be too frustrated when everything doesn't happen immediately, but we'll be determined to make progress and will punish politically, democratically, those who don't.
Absolutely. And perhaps finally, with that concluding point, it's fair to say, as you've already mentioned, a lot of the population are frustrated, no matter how they vote in the referendum or their general political opinions. But perhaps, for those people, is there something you'd point to be optimistic, looking towards the future about?
I think I'm very clear. We're a great nation. We can't just do things on our own. We have to recognize that we live in an incredibly rapidly growing global environment, and the power sources and the power politically has changed over the last 20, 30 years. But we are creative, we are innovative, and we will pull through. And we'll do it because we won't have anyone else to blame anymore if we come out of the European Union. And we'll need to literally pull our socks up and do it ourselves. In the end, my message is clear. Nothing is ever as good as it seems at the time, and nothing is ever as bad. And we've come through difficult times in the past, and we'll come through again.
Lord Blunkett, thank you very much.
Thank you, Jonathan.
As always, it's been a pleasure interviewing and learning from our guests. I hope you've all enjoyed listening. Until next time, I'm off the Adam and Eve to raise a glass to raising standards. Goodbye.
Thank you very much for listening to our podcast. You can find every episode on iTunes, YouTube, and Spotify. The views expressed by guests in each podcast are their own. They do not represent the opinions of the Parliamentary Review, Westminster Publications, Lord Pickles, Lord Blunkett, David Curry, or any other guests on the podcast. If you'd like to know more about the Parliamentary Review, please visit our website at www.theparliamentaryreview.co.uk.